This video is brought to you by Surfshar. Hey noble ones, what an immense pleasure to have you here today, and I'm just looking at an incredibly interesting topic, the Winged Hussars. Yes, that's what we're going to talk about today, and I think it's rather appropriate for me to be wearing my breastplate and placard, although in this case maybe it would have been more appropriate to wear sabatons. So, the Winged Hussars are totally iconic, one of the most famous cavalry troops in Europe, not only because of their fame and battle efficacy and Age of Empires, but also because of their stunning looks. I mean, the kind of armor that they were wearing, and what about the wings? Did they actually wear the wings in combat? And what sort of weapons did they use? Well, you see, our discussion today has got lots of different stages because as we stride across the centuries, you will notice a big difference in the way the Hussars were, fought and looked like, say, in the 15th century, in the 16th century, and so forth. Now, whenever we think of the Winged Hussars, we imagine them as Polish Winged Hussars, meaning from Poland, and that is true when we think about their later iteration, if you will. So the most popular ones that we normally imagine, the professional Hussars, yes, they are Polish, but the original early Hussars were actually a sort of Hungarian bands of mercenaries that were rather popular in Europe, not only with Poland, of course, because the Polish crown will recruit quite a few, but also with, generally speaking, monarchy. And the thing becomes interesting because as the Polish crown continues recruiting these bands of Hungarian mercenaries, the original Hussars, then they would start liking them so much that they decided not only to start training their own Polish Hussars, but to replace completely the traditional heavy lancers of Poland. Now, as the Hussars become Polish, they begin to be recruited by Polish nobility. So at this point, we're not talking about mercenaries anymore, we're talking about mounted nobility. The so-called Golden Age of the Winged Hussars was in the late 16th and 17th century. Many massive battles against diverse enemies were won because of the Hussars. Probably the biggest victory of the Winged Hussars was the relief of the siege of Vienna by the Turks in 1683. Now, I really want you to imagine this situation. You've got Vienna, it's surrounded by the Turks and their troops, they are sieging it, and then the Winged Hussars come to save the day. But we're talking about 14,000 Winged Hussars charging. This is probably one of the greatest cavalry charges in history that literally makes something in the lines of the Siege of Minas Tirith look like a joke. And I'm a huge fan of fantasy, but you see, sometimes history is cooler than fantasy. 14,000 freaking... Oh my gosh. In a sense, this was a real legendary European cavalry moment. The Winged Hussars will remain in service until the 1770s, and then they will be replaced by the Uhlans, Alans, Uhlans, no idea how to pronounce it, but it was a kind of light lance cavalry in Eastern European and Germanic lands in the Napoleonic era. But then again, Polish lancers did become famous as exiled soldiers in the Napoleonic army, so let's just say it, the Polish were great. Now I'd like to mention the sponsor that made this video possible, Surfshar. In our day and age, protection is not just a matter of physical security. Cyber security is also extremely important, and that's what a VPN does. A VPN is a virtual private network. All of you obviously use the internet on a daily basis, say for study, for entertainment, visiting all sorts of sites. And what a VPN does, it encrypts your data to add an extra layer of security. As a content creator myself, I have learned the hard way that you always want to have as much protection as possible to make sure that you keep all of your personal information, data and devices safe. And at the same time, your browsing activity hidden, because unfortunately you never know what sort of criminals are lurking, waiting for you, spying on you. The way a VPN works is that it lets you place your computer or your phone anywhere in the world. So you might be in the US and appear as if you were using a computer from the UK or any other place for that matter, but it also allows you to access the internet as if you were in another country. And that's very useful if you want to watch content, for example, on Netflix or other sites that wasn't available for your country, or they had restrictions, for example. Perhaps you want to watch a TV series or a specific season that wasn't available in your country. It's very useful, and in my opinion, it's an excellent choice. Today I've got a special offer for you. You can use my special code Metatron to get an 83% off and 3 months for free. Also, Surfshar has got a 30 days money back guarantee, so you can just test it out in absolute safety. Check out the links in the description below, and big thanks to Surfshar for sponsoring my video. Okay, so we spoke about the origins of the Hussars. But what about the wings, Metatron? Okay, let's talk about the armor and let's get to the wings. When we look at the armor of a typical Polish winged hussar, we see first of all that they've got tailed pot helmet, typical nasal protection, neck guard, similar to that of a sallet, which shouldn't surprise us because sallets were extremely popular. This kind of helmet is a great compromise between good visibility and excellent protection. Now, for the torso protection, we've got a typical breast and backplate with long tassets. But the thing is that it kind of looks relatively trapezoid. So the shape is different to what, for example, I'm wearing right now, which is a typical Italian late 15th century sort of breastplate, backplate and fold, which has more shape, if you will, but still a very, very good kind of torso protection. And by the way, these two drawings that you've just seen, they were made by my friend Michele over at the Night of Art channel. You will find link in the description below if you want to see how he actually made them. Now, beneath all of that, they would have a long kaftan-like garment, which would have been decorated depending on the sort of personal wealth of each soldier, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, and it could have been made of buff leather. Thing is though, as far as we understand, that would work as an arming doublet, not as a gambeson, so not exceedingly padded stuff under their plate. Now, talking about the plate, was it bulletproof? Well, here's the thing, most armor at the time of those who could pay for it would be bulletproof, although I should say Aquabus balls proof. So although we don't exactly know, it is highly probable that their armor would have been bulletproof as well. Now, another thing that might surprise you is that yes, they would have full plate arm harnesses, but no gauntlets. And although this may sound really strange, but because, you know, protection for the hands is rather important, you also have to imagine that this is an extremely highly maneuverable cavalry. And so they preferred not to use gauntlets so that they could have better rein manipulation and fine saber control. Also, you have to imagine that their weapons had good hand protection depending on the century we're talking about, but I'll get to the weapons in a moment. The wings. When talking about the wings, sources vary a lot. Some period sources of people who actually saw them at parades said that the wings were attached to the saddle, while others said that they were attached directly to the harness. As we look at excellent examples of armor, sometimes the wings are fastened to them. So both varieties existed, both methods of attachment existed. Now, which one of the two they would have used in battle, we don't know. So there are claims that mention the fact that these wings would be used to distract or frighten the enemy. Now, I'm not really sure about the distraction part, and probably this is a little bit of a romanticized Victorianism, but I do believe that in a way the wings probably did have a psychological effect in battle, because they were a symbol. No, really think about it. You know who the Winged Hussars are. And you know that because if you're a medieval soldier, you know how popular they are, you know the sort of battles that they won. And so as you are fighting, as you are doing whatever you're doing, at one point you see these knights charging towards your way and you recognize them because you see the wings. That probably did frighten people. So in my opinion, it's not that the wings themselves frightened people, it's that the wings made people immediately recognize, goodness gracious, those are the Polish hussars, we are doomed. So we can see that in terms of armor, they were very well equipped. What about weapons? Now, we do know that generally speaking in the late medieval period is when lances start to become longer and longer and longer. Most of that is because they need to counter pikes, which are also very, very long. And lances could be up to 6 frigging meters. The lances used by the hussars were of a lighter construction, and they would have a sort of wooden ball that was used as a vamplate or protection for the hand. The Polish sabre. This was a cavalry sabre with moderate curvature. It had very good hand protection, and it also had a thumb ring, which was used because of the Polish fencing method or style. It would be single-edged. Sometimes we have full-edged blades, sometimes we don't, but it would generally speaking have a so-called Jelman, or a second edge at the back of the point. Then they had another kind of sword, or was it? A kind of pike sword. In essence, a short lance with a hilt. Now this is an interesting choice, because it basically made the hussars capable to face all sorts of enemies from all sorts of distances, and they would be effective against both riders in full armor or unarmored footmen. Some examples reach 1.6 meters, but generally speaking in the range of 1.5 meters or so. Then we move into the ranged weapons department. In the earlier period they would use sort of little composite bows, but then we move into pistols and carbines. Now you have to imagine that at this time you're talking about single shot early form of pistols, and the interesting thing is that they would use them giving point. This means that basically they wouldn't hold the pistol like this, but they would hold it like this, in a similar way to when you give point with a saber. So, I'm preparing a dedicated video to early gunpowder and early firearms, and so I will go into the details onto that video, but suffice to say for this video that early pistols and carbines weren't particularly reliable. Sometimes they wouldn't ignite and therefore they wouldn't shoot. Other times they would shoot, but it would take longer. There was a sort of time variable, which means that from the moment you pull the trigger until the moment that the weapon actually shoots, sometimes you could have a few seconds. So it was very important to be able to maintain aim at the target, follow the target, and many gunners of the time were actually taught to shoot at point blank when they were shooting people in armor, to literally touching and resting the point of your weapon onto your opponent's breastplate and then shoot. But I'll go more into the details on the dedicated video. So now that we have seen both the armor and the weapons that the Winged Hussars would normally, or generally speaking, be associated with, we do need to remember one thing: they would have to provide their own equipment. So of course, depending on each soldier's individual wealth, the weapons that I mentioned, the armor that I mentioned, Hussars were expected to have. But the degree of quality of said weapons and armor would vary depending on personal wealth. So, do you like the Winged Hussars? Are they your favorite kind of knight? And if not, what's your favorite type of medieval knight? Well, let me know in the comments below. And this ends our video for today, and I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Also remember the fantastic offer given by Surfshar VPN, the sponsor for this video. You will find links in the description below. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.